Fascism came to power without a project to reform the Italian educational system. Nevertheless, the numerous educational reforms carried out by the fascist party give a sufficient idea of the importance for them of education as a means of political unification and control of Italian society. Any totalitarian regime, fascist Italy is no exception, requires the formation of a new intellectual elite. The regime needs its own ideologically loyal intellectuals who will justify the advantages of the new regime and prove the inviolability and worthlessness of its opponents, and educate worthy citizens of an ideal society. Correct education allows us to guarantee the stability of the social system, and children's and youth organizations operating in a totalitarian state, together with schools and universities, are intended for the social education of the younger generations and the reproduction of the prevailing ideological dogmas. This field, the most important aspect of the change in school education, was the Educational Reform Act of 1923, prepared by Giovanni Gentile. According to the author of the law, the reform was supposed to help move away from the pedagogical confusion and sad years of Italian political decline to simple, reliable, classical principles of freedom. In primary school programs, teaching methods focused on simply memorizing information were abandoned. In the lower grades, the number of creative subjects increased sharply. In addition, game elements were introduced into the teaching methodology to develop creative thinking. In children, the teaching of the law of God was introduced in all schools to lay the foundations of moral education in children. The Gentile reform led to a significant increase in state presence in Italian educational structures. As part of this reform, a rigid hierarchical structure of education management was formed, built into a single chain from the Minister of Education to the ordinary teacher. According to the plan of the Minister of Public Education, the task of the state was to carry out a reasonable and targeted selection of students in order to select the best for further education. Giovanni believed that primary schools should provide everyone with the tools to master knowledge. Secondary schools should introduce him to culture, and higher schools should form an elite. Mussolini spoke about school educational reform as follows: the entire school, at all its levels, teaches Italian youth to understand fascism, to renew themselves in fascism, and to live in the historical climate created by the fascist revolution. The school should educate the new character of the Italian. I believe that the school, the entire school, should be, first of all, an educator who shapes morality. Things were different outside of schools. For leisure, children were provided with real weapons, and fascist youth organizations raised them in the spirit of belligerence. For example, the largest youth organization, Opera Nazionale's Было, organized summer camps for children whose families were unable to travel. Following the example of the pioneer camps in the Soviet Union, they tried to develop belligerence and hatred of other nationalities in children as part of the games. Clashes with Slavic children were provoked, as well as a negative attitude towards the peoples of Ethiopia. The most important element of fascist rituals was the transfer of weapons from one group of youth to another. As part of the ritual, small arms were passed into the hands of a younger youth, and the one who handed them over, in turn, received a new rifle from the older one. Such a procedure was supposed to contribute to the ideological unity generated by the fateful collectivism of an active people on the march, imbued with a militaristic spirit, ready to perceive themselves no longer within the framework of a class model, but in a change of generations. The most successful innovation of the fascist regime in the matter of educational reform can be considered the creation of university fascist groups, Gruppi Universitari Fascisti, GUF. As Luca La Rova, a modern researcher of the activities of the GUF, notes, the GUF was considered by the fascist regime as nurseries from which new leadership cadres of the party were to emerge. One of the central events of the fascist regime within the framework of the policy on education and upbringing of youth was the establishment of lectures readings on culture and art. Beginning in 1934, the State University of Fine Arts was entrusted with holding annual lectures readings, which acquired exceptional importance due to the search for consensus among students, as well as because of the freedom that was given to lecture participants for the first time. Students had the opportunity to engage in dialogue and debate. To emphasize the significance of the lecture, the magazine Lectures Readings on Culture and Art was even created. This magazine wrote about the lectures. Like this, it should be noted that the litorium are not so much useful and fruitful as they are necessary, since the solution to the problem of educating youth and the continuity of the spirit of the revolution from one generation to another cannot exist if young people do not have a way to express their thoughts and feelings. Lectures readings, according to the plan of the fascist leaders, were supposed to serve for the selection of the intellectual elite. Regular readings were held from 1930 to 1940, but were closed due to the war. The topics of the debates were quite consistent with the intention of the readings: military music and mass psychology, the place of theatre in political propaganda, the need for the Mediterranean Sea for Italy, political literature of Italy in the 20th century, the nature of fascist cinema. Topics such as the constitutional structure of the corporate state were selected from Duce's speeches, and corporate economics. Competitions in the form of public debates on scientific and political topics took place at 3 levels: university, provincial, or Italian. Those who won the last round received the title of lictors in a certain specialty for 1 year. Victory in the first qualifying round, which was held at the university level, gave the opportunity to participate in the second qualifying round, the prelatoria. They were usually held from February to March on the same topics and in the same order as the lectorial readings. The last and final round was the lectorial readings themselves, held in April. The judging commission consisted of 5 judges, one of whom was the lictor of the previous year in this discipline. The number of participants in the readings increased every year. 170 for students took part in the first lectorial readings, and about 18,000 in the 5th. The opening ceremony took place in the presence of the highest hierarchs of the regime, accompanied by choreographic numbers and performances of military bands. During this ceremony, students solemnly took an oath in which they pledged to convey the patriotic spirit, the spirit of the nation, in their scientific works. Lectures readings became a significant contribution to the process of creating a fascist society. The litorioli system became an element in the selection of the new political elite. Many litorial winners were invited to work in party and government structures. Some of them continued their studies at the School of Fascist Mysticism. Lectures readings were supposed to demonstrate the faith of young people in the ideology and doctrine of fascism, to become a triumph of the activities of the Gov and the National Fascist Party. In preparing the new intellectual elite of Italy, the Fascist Party tried to create, through the higher education system, an instrument for the total subordination of students to the political will of the regime. It was inevitable that young people would fall under the influence of propaganda, but it cannot be denied that it was the GUF that became the incubator of hidden anti-fascism, secret free thinking, which clearly manifested itself immediately after the fall of the fascist regime. In 1943, the new intellectual elite of Italy consisted of people who had gone through the Gov school, among whom there are quite a few winners of the lectures readings.